Welcome everyone to episode number 37 from Police to Priest. I'm Father Ricks, and you know what? We are going through some changes with this podcast format, but after a week's hiatus, we are back with something new. And we just want to give you a quick update before we jump into the episode. So we're planning on moving forward with our weekly Sunday format, and I'll continue to host this podcast every week. We're going to try out some different ideas in the coming weeks. It's a work in progress. Father Joe will still continue to give his amazing insights when he's available, but because of the overwhelming ministry growth for St. Joseph Mission Church, in addition to all the other stuff that's going on in our worlds, it can be tough to align a weekly schedule. This is a new experience, and while Father Joe may not be here in the moment, I am joined by Sister Nicole for a dialogue on the difficulty of feeling like you're sinking in a chaotic situation. I think it's something that we all have to go through at one point or another. And obviously, this is very relevant to first responders, more so for law enforcement, but what Nicole and I chat about this week deals with acknowledging the challenges while finding a way to embrace an ethos of love and compassion. It's a challenging aspiration I think we all hope to find. But at the very least, we hope that these words and thoughts add some clarity to the challenges and confusions we're all going to deal with at one point or another. So with that, as always, we hope that you go in peace to love and serve the world and be kind to one another. Sister Nicole, it is so wonderful for you to be a part of this week's podcast, so I'm going to leave it to you to read the Gospel of the day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Father Ricks. So this is a reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After dismissing the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Well into the night he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat was already some distance from land, battered by the waves because the wind was against them. Jesus came toward them, walking on the sea, very early in the morning. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. Immediately Jesus spoke to them. "Have courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter answered him, "command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." And climbing out of the boat, Peter started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand, caught hold of him, and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those in the boat worshipped him and said, "Truly you are the Son of God."
Praise be to God. So, Sister Nicole, as we were starting off our podcast talking about bouncing back some ideas back and forth, something struck you and you started on this beautiful soliloquy.
Well, first of all, soliloquy or rant, Father Ricks? Soliloquy or rant? I don't know.
It's a difference without distinction.
This is very true. Yeah, I can sort of start us in from the beginning, since clearly I was getting on my soapbox a little bit. So possibly before doing that, I should lead our lovely listeners into my thought process here. But essentially, Father Ricks and I, we were bouncing some ideas back and forth about this podcast, and I was talking about this gospel, which I love. I mean, we're all, I think, pretty familiar with the whole walking on water thing, right? That's one of the miracles that Jesus performs that is always like top of the list, right? And it's amazing. It's an amazing story. And it's also a really beautiful story, I think. When you track what actually happens in the gospel, one of the things that you notice when you read it is Peter has this immediate trust in Jesus, in his teacher, right? Peter says, "Command me to walk on the water. Command me to come to you." And Jesus says, "Come," and Peter gets out on that water and he is able to walk on water, right? Which is it's a miracle. And, I see that and I think, okay, the reason he's able to do that is because he has this amazing trust in God. He doesn't question it. He doesn't say like, hey, maybe if you tell me to come out there, I'll actually be able to do this, or can you teach me how to do this? He just says, tell me to come out to you, and I will come out to you. So it's this amazing trust. And then, when he's walking on that water for that brief period of time, the implication is, the assumption is, that he is looking directly at his Lord, directly at Jesus, because what we learn immediately afterward is that he starts to sink when he notices the wind. He starts to sink when he notices the storm around him and how crazy it is and the chaos around him. And that's when he starts to go down. That's when he starts to feel fear. His focus is broken and he sinks. And then there's this beautiful moment where he calls out for help and Jesus immediately picks him up out of the water. So it's this great famous moment. And, I was thinking about this in terms of our world today and especially the state of our world right now. I mean, there is just so much going on all the time. There's so much chaos everywhere. And it reminds me of this chaotic sea that they're on, right? They're all terrified of the wind and they're being battered by the waves. And it's just this very stressful situation. And it sort of made me think, when you are a person who works directly in the line of that chaos, who works with that chaos. I'm thinking about people like in law enforcement, right? This is from police to priest. So we're thinking about people in law enforcement, social work, even ministry to some extent. You are facing that chaos day in, day out, every second of every day. And you are seeing horrific things that other people maybe don't get to see on a daily basis. And I think that when you're working in that field, when you have to do that every day, it's so easy to become jaded. And it's so easy to start to sink under all that weight, to feel like the chaos of the world has overtaken your thoughts because it's, every minute of your day, that it's overtaken your heart because you are no longer able to trust that there is goodness in the world. And it's just consuming your very being. And I think that happens to a lot of people. I've met a lot of people who just seem to have given up on the world. But this is where I kind of got on my soapbox, right? Because this is where I started to get heated. But the problem that I have with this line of logic that I'm following, which I think is accurate, right? I mean, I really do think that this jaded feeling happens to a lot of people, and it's only natural that it happens. But that's where I start to get angry, because I think it would be so easy in this conversation to say, well, listen, all you people who are out there feeling jaded and tired and burnt out, if you just work harder to focus on Jesus, then you're set. Then you're going to be fine and you're not going to sink. Right? Like, I feel like that's such an easy, logical conclusion. Like, I could feel myself kind of moving toward that conclusion, right? Like, keep your thoughts focused on God and you'll be fine. But the reality is that Peter isn't Jesus. Peter is a human being. He doesn't just sink under the waves because he doubts. He sinks because he's human, and he doubts because he's human. It's like a logical train of thought there. He is not Jesus. Jesus is the one who can walk from the shore to the boat, right? He's the one who's not going to start sinking. Peter is the one who does get easily distracted by his fear. And that's a perfectly normal reaction. Jesus pulls him out of the water and he chides him a little. He says, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? But he doesn't, go railing against him about how terrible it is that he is not able to keep his focus on him the whole time. And I think that it's relevant to life, right? It's relevant to real life, because how many times have we seen somebody living through darkness, experiencing darkness, sitting in the midst of their pain, and with the best intentions in the world, people come by and they present them with platitudes, or they say, hey, listen, if you pray a little more, you'll feel so much better. I don't think that I've necessarily talked about this in my public ministry before, but like many people in the world right now, I suffer from mental illness. I have, my share, like my 1 or 2 diagnosed mental illnesses that I deal with on a daily basis. And I don't mean to make light of the situation. Mental illness is a terrible thing to deal with. And, I get through it because I have access to treatment. I have access to the support system that I need. But there have been many times in my life where I allow myself to become vulnerable, and I allow myself to share my pain with someone that I feel close to. And again, I'm not angry because I know that the intentions are good. But the response is so often, if you just pray more, you'll feel better. Or you need to work on strengthening your faith because that will help you come out of your mental illness. I've even had people tell me, and again, with the best intentions in the world, they told me this because they loved me. But I've had people tell me, mental illness is usually a sign that you are living in sin, and you need to figure out what it is that you're doing wrong. And once you figure that out and repent and change your life, then your mental illness is going to go away. And that's just not how it works. That's just not how it works. For so many different reasons, for so many different reasons, but also because mental illness is a physical ailment as well as a mental one. And sometimes being told to pray doesn't make me feel any better.
Yeah. And I think that so it's something that I think that many of us out there deal with, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed. There's a lot of different stuff going on in our heads that I think don't really get translated, like the darkness that we experience in various different ways. But that's also kind of bringing it into the whole Police to Priest podcast concept, is that's also something that not only police have to respond to as, untrained mental health caregivers in some form or another, but it's also something that many of them, as Father Joe has mentioned more than once, the mental trauma that these first responders have to experience, and many times it goes undiagnosed for various different reasons, whether it's the culture or whether it's a lack of access to the care, whether it's a lack of being proactive, but it all ties together, and that's kind of the beautiful thing. And I was thinking to myself, it's so easy to, like you said, give in to the hopelessness and despair of being in the midst of a storm and realize that you're sinking. It's something I've certainly experienced more than once, and it's something that I feel like is a universal thing that we all go through on some level or another. And when, like you were saying, when it came to people trying to give solutions or whatever, I think the overriding factor, I think back to the movie with Tom Cruise back in like 2000 or whatever, Minority Report, where it was at the beginning where he rolled the ball across the little table and the other guy caught it, and Tom Cruise asked, "Why did you catch it?" "Because I knew it was going to fall." It's like, well, okay, so you're a human being, and I think this to the gospel, you're a human being on the water, you suddenly realize what happens when I'm standing on water, I'm gonna sink. And that's the same sort of thing that just flashed through my mind. Or I was thinking, yeah, Minority Report parallels, like I caught it because it was going to fall. And in the same way that somebody standing on the ocean, it would be like, well, of course I'm going to sink. I'm standing on water. That's not how things are supposed to work. And I think in society, we kind of follow that trajectory of having to confront the sort of brutal reality that I think has been more and more evident, especially during the pandemic. Not only have we seen deficiencies in healthcare, police being able to respond, but then you also have the racial unrests as well that also expose many of these other realities that a lot of people have been living for their entire lives and yet have never really been heard for. And now we're all like, oh God, are we Peter, sinking into the water slowly? And
Right.
and so I feel like the counter to that for me is not platitudes, and it's not wistful thinking, and it's not magical thinking. It is the kind of raw reality for hope and healing that can say miracle. Like, there have been stories that I've heard, and I'm sure we all have, about just miraculous situations where normal people have done extraordinary things to be able to make the world just a little bit better. And it's that sort of thing that if we all, as a communal society, if we embrace that and engage that there can be something really powerful that comes out of that communal sense of togetherness, because you're going to see a lot more of those miraculous things happening that shouldn't, but they do.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. And I'm glad too that you've mentioned some of the things going on in our world, right? Because that's another one of the pitfalls, I think, of the whole platitude culture and that kind of thing, and possibly
Lip
not taking a
service.
moment
Yeah.
to. Yeah, and it's like you have to take a moment to recognize your humanity in the gospel. You can't read this gospel and just say like, oh, if he had trusted more, he would have been fine. You have to recognize Peter's humanity. And you have to recognize the storm. Like, this is another one of those things, right? I think it's easy to say, like, I want to
Yeah.
walk above the storm. I want to walk above the storm. And put our heads in the sand and pretend that if we just focus on God, we don't have to deal with the chaos. But the fact is that the chaos is there, right? And all those men on the boat, they weren't not going to take the storm seriously. It's a beautiful miracle that Jesus is able to come and calm the waters. It's a beautiful image to me that I think of all the time, But when we're equating it to chaos in the world, when we're equating it to the kind of things that we're seeing these days, I don't necessarily think the point is to pretend that we can rise above the chaos and pretend it isn't there. I think it's about not necessarily learning to walk above it, but learning to acknowledging it and understanding that there is hope to cling to. Even in those terribly dark moments where we feel like we are sinking, the point is not to focus on the good so that you can rise above the chaos and ignore it. The point is to focus on the good so that you can do those types of things you're talking about, right? Focus on the good so that you have the inner strength and the hope and the desire to get together with your community, to do something, to take action, to do what needs to be done, to change the world little by little. I think it's that kind of situation. It's too easy to believe that we have to rise above the chaos in such a way as to ignore it. I don't think that is really possible or the point in our world.
And I wonder, kind of as an alternative interpretation of that, is that we often think about the calming of the storm as this magnificent and mystical event that you're able to stop the churning waters. And as you're saying all of that, I just think back to my own life, and I think many of us, especially those who deal with socially interactive positions, first responders, clergy, etc., that there are times when we come across people who are very negative, antagonistic, and just like you can feel the anger and the rage and the like they just need to yell at someone, and they need to express their emotions. And I would like to think that more often than not we find a way. I mean, heck, I was talking with my mom earlier today, and she had literally just had an instance where it was not a raging storm or anything, but you could tell somebody was getting worked up. And so she just said, okay, whatever you need to do. And I feel like a lot of what it is just people want to feel listened to. And it's like, if this is going to sort of help your soul and your peace of mind to know that somebody is listening to you. And I think that, Nicole, that is what you get at so often, especially, for your service reflections on Thursdays, and anytime that you kind of speak, that is what it gets to, is that people just want to be heard. And
Yes.
the moment that people realize, oh my goodness, like a person's actually listening to me, like that calms the storm. It stops the waves. It creates that sort of serene environment that existed before. And so, as simple as it may seem, like that is something that genuinely seems to be the kind of miracle that we experience from the gospel for today.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I so strongly believe that our Creator made us to be in community, that we were created as interpersonal beings, So when human beings do not feel listened to, when human beings feel alone, then of course it's easy to sink. I mean, I can't think of a more natural response to feeling that way, to feeling not listened to. And it does cause a lot of internal chaos and external chaos. And sometimes you really do need to make your voice heard. I think we've seen that with the protests that have been going on, which I support. There are moments where you need to do what it takes to make your voice heard when you've consistently not been listened to for hundreds of years. And I do think you're right. I do think that when that listening happens, then we're looking at potential for miracles, right? We're looking at the potential for people to work together and feel listened to and heard and feel like people. And that's when things start to calm. That's when the chaos starts to feel, again, that's more hopeful. That's when it really is possible to focus on the hope that is still there. When somebody reaches out and takes your hand, right? Yeah. Because, look at the gospel. Jesus isn't, so angry with Peter that he doubted and had a moment of fear and sinking. He just reaches out and picks him up. He doesn't let him sink or let him get a little scared. It says immediately Jesus reached out his hand, right? So you have to, first of all, be willing to ask for help. You have to acknowledge that it's okay to be sinking. And we have to acknowledge that it's understandable for people to be feeling that way and that we all need to reach out hands to each other.
Yeah, and I I think I couldn't have put that better myself. That, yeah, when it comes down to it, we're all going to be in that position at one form or another. And, in defense of sort of my own ignorance, that Father Joe, in all the Police to Priest episodes we've had to this point, has taught me about the feelings that the police department, when he was serving, and what other police officers feel right now, especially when you come to very polarized issues like defund the police and stuff like that. There are people who are just who want to do the best, but they're involved in a culture that's not perfect, but also hearing the demonization of them simply for being a part of that community. And to kind of find that point of meeting where we can listen on both sides, genuinely listen. And this is something that I think about for my first ministry, and one of my favorite things that I would do on a mission trip project, where every night everyone would get in a circle and we'd all have a chance to go around and share the experiences. But of course, we'd have that talking stick. And so when a person, and this happened with disagreements too, if there is one or two people who had a problem with each other, then it'd take them out and say, okay, so here's the talking stick, and as long as they're talking, when they're done, then you talk back to them the message that they were trying to express to you and how you heard it. Mm-hmm. And then trying to find that clarification, going back and forth. It's I maybe didn't understand you the same way, but being those neutral arbiters, I think, is the responsibility of those that have the chance to form those communicative bonds. Because when you bridge that divide and you allow people to kind of take a breath and be vulnerable, which is the most powerful spiritual experience that any of us can have, but we need the trust in the circle in which we express that vulnerability. Same way that even Peter, Jesus right in front of him, that circle of trust, it just, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. And I think that's what the gospel kind of says, is that it's possible, it's there, but you know what? You continue to trust Jesus is gonna, or whatever form of faith that you look at can lift you up with the spirit of love that I think all religions share in common.
I think you're completely right, because it's so easy to focus on what went wrong in this gospel as opposed to what went right. And I think, again, this is supernatural of human beings. We're very unforgiving of ourselves. And I think we're very unforgiving of fear and doubt, right? I think that makes perfect sense. But, you look at the Gospels in general, and I feel like we all sort of, at least I do, I sort of remember all of these instances where Jesus said, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Right? It's easy to hear that. It's easy to think, oh man, I'm doubting again. This isn't good. This isn't what Jesus wants me to do. But what we forget to focus on is that we have, in our belief system, we have a God who became man. I was always taught Jesus is fully divine and fully human at the same time. It's one of the miracles, right? We have a God who became man and who therefore understood every aspect of what it is to be human. And we look at literally the most important moment of our entire faith system. We look at Jesus on the cross, And we look at him say, you know, my God, why have you forsaken me? We have a God who doubted. Look at him in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Saying, you know, if it's possible, please take this cup from me. He feared. We had a God who felt all of these emotions, but we have a tendency to only remember him as the God who said, why are you doubting? As opposed to the God who has his own scars, right? Because a God with scars is never going to look down on mine. That's never going to happen. And, you know, I think it's so important to look at these moments of interpersonal relationship, to understand that we're looking at a gospel where, yes, Jesus is divine, but he's also man. We're also talking about the relationships between Jesus and his disciples as people, as human beings, as somebody, you know, imparting wisdom on them, but also loving them and allowing himself to be loved and working together in this very special way. And so it's that moment of Jesus pulling Peter out of the water is super important to me, because it's not just a symbol of, you know, God is going to be there to pull you out. God is going to be there to help you. Like, you're going to feel better eventually, whatever. But it's also just this awesome moment of working together, right? It's not just like God is going to save me from anything. It's God is right there. He isn't going to judge me. He's just going to reach out his hand. That, I think, is really beautiful.
I can't say this enough, that I think that the Bible is a perfect representation of the human experience in both its good and its bad. And I feel like in a passage like this, we get to see both of those. And Sister Nicole, thank you for being able to share your perspective. I think that was really, it opened my eyes to a couple of things, and I think it is something that should be inspirational to those that are just trying to find a way to make it work day by day, as flawed of a world as we live in.
No, thank you so much for having me and for having these conversations with me, because let me tell you, they are so enjoyable. I love putting these conversations out for all of our listeners, and I'm so grateful that everybody just kind of lets me get on here and get on my soapbox.
And what a beautiful soapbox it is.
And my ramblings.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy it, and I'm so grateful for it. And
well, awesome.
Thank you so much.
And hopefully we will have a future announcement, ideally in the next month or so, that Sister Nicole and I might be venturing out on our own with another St. Joseph Mission podcast that could be a weekly basis. It's an ongoing process, an ongoing conversation, so we'll see what happens. If you enjoyed this conversation, if you saw this on Facebook and listened to it, get back to us, let us know what you thought. It'd be great to get feedback. And until then, we will talk to you next time. God bless you all.
God bless.